Shout with joy to God all the earth.
Sing to the glory of his name.
Offer him glory and praise.
Sing to the glory of his
Sing
name.
to the
Sing to the
glory.
glory of his
Sing
name.
to the
Sing to the
glory.
glory of his name.
Resurrection of Jesus, Part 1. How confident are we that Jesus actually died? Are we sure about this? To many of us, it seems like a pretty nonsensical question, right? Of course Jesus died. How do we know? Because the Bible tells us so, right? Yes, our entire Christian faith hinges on the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel. When I was growing up, it seems like every Easter, or sometimes it's around Christmas, but there was always a movie, a documentary, a biography, a behind-the-scenes look, an expose that would somehow cast doubt on not just the life of Jesus, whether he actually lived or not, but whether he died and was resurrected as well. Skeptics always seem to be creating ideas around the resurrection that questioned his death. Why? Obviously, they can't deal with the resurrection. So in order for there to be a resurrection, guess what you got to have? You got to have a death. Can we agree on that? To have a resurrection, we must have a death. No one wants to believe that someone can be resurrected from the dead, so in their mindsets, let's figure out a way around that death. Now, question, why is it so difficult for some to believe in the resurrection? Because that kind of thing just doesn't happen in our natural world. It doesn't. Skeptics and naturalists, when they attempt to explain the Bible, they always have to eliminate the unnatural, what does not make sense to them. So again, in order to make sense of any kind of resurrection, they have to eliminate the fact that he needed resurrection. He didn't die, right? This is what they're trying to tell us. But here's the outcome of this. Let's pretend like there is no death. Jesus did not die. If there's no death, then guess what? There's no resurrection. That's what they're going for, right? Obvious. Okay, but if there's no resurrection, there's also no gospel. And if there's no gospel, there is no Christianity. There's no Christianity. We can live as we want. So when you deny the death of Jesus, this is a gospel-denying belief, and it has salvific importance. Without the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, we are all condemned to die and have no hope at all of eternal life. When we take a look, we start today with a two-part series, beginning with an examination of the death of Jesus. That's what we're going to start with today. It's going to culminate next week, where we're going to examine the resurrection of Jesus. For the resurrection to be validated for next week, the death must be proven, and that's what we're going to do this week. Now, as excited as I am to share this message with you, I don't want this message to stop with you. Don't let it stop here in the four walls of our church. I want you to tell someone about this, because if anyone doesn't know that Jesus has died for their sins, again, for the forgiveness of their sins, they are living a life without hope. Without this belief, they're living a life without hope, without faith, and without the gospel. So what evidence do some folks use to deny the death of Jesus? All of you have a pew Bible, either in front of you or behind you. Some of you brought your own Bibles. Some of you may have it on your phone. Go ahead and open up your Bibles to the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas. So while you're looking for it, I got a confession to make. You're not going to find it. Why won't you find it? No one could find the Gospel of Barnabas until after the 13th century. The Gospel of Barnabas was written after the 13th century by an unknown author, and guess who it was not? It was not Barnabas. How do we know this? Spoiler alert. Barnabas, the real Barnabas, lived in the first century, and he was a travel companion with the Apostle Paul. So for a book to be written after the 13th century by an author who's been dead for over 1,000 years, something smells false. Something smells fake. Something smells wrong. Okay? How could this come about? Oftentimes, when someone had a better idea than what was presented in the gospel, they would write down their idea, but they would attach a name that had credibility. If someone named Bobby wrote the book of Barnabas and put his name on it, the Gospel of Bobby, we wouldn't believe it. So they have to take a name that's credible from the New Testament to bring legitimacy to this particular gospel. So, for the book to be written after the 13th century, yeah, we can disregard this as a true gospel. But this gospel is highly regarded by folks who claim Jesus never died. Why? Why do they regard this book so highly? Because this particular false gospel lays a claim. The claim is this: when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, to put him on the cross, they actually grabbed Judas and arrested Judas and put him on the cross. How in the world did that happen? How could they have made this mistake? I'm glad you asked. A host of angels, according to the Gospel of Barnabas, a host of angels came down and spirited Jesus away. And on their way out, they made Judas look like and sound like Jesus with their divine power. So when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus, they knew they wanted Jesus, but whom they saw was actually Judas. They thought it was Jesus. And no matter what Judas said, it's not me, really. It's the other guy. I didn't do it. He looks and sounds enough like Jesus, so they put him on the cross. What happened to Jesus? Once again, I'm glad you asked. Either some legends say he was spirited away to heaven. Others say he was spirited away to India. Yeah, the nation of India, where he got married, had children, and died an old man. Nothing spectacular, right? No. A friend of mine came across this material and he asked me about the validity of this book. Now, at the time, I'd never heard of this book, The Gospel of Barnabas, never heard of it. So I took a look at it. I read through it a little bit and I realized two things. Number one, when you've got four gospels, minimum four gospels written by independent authors that say one thing, but there's one lone gospel that says something different, well, the burden of proof is on the one, not the four. And as we discover in our sermon today, our lesson today, other books, there's more books of the Bible that testify to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus as well. It's not just the four gospels. But number two, I realized that this gospel, the Gospel of Barnabas, it's actually a denigration of the character of Jesus, because it paints a portrait of a Jesus who is a deceiver. If Jesus did not die, that's one of the greatest deceptions in the history of man. Not one of, it's the greatest deception in the history of mankind, that Jesus did not die. So if I'm 1,000 years removed from an event, let's say I'm the author of the Gospel of Barnabas. If I'm 1,000 years removed from the actual event, I can say and explain anything I want and not have any accountability to the truth, can't I? Yeah. The Gospel of Barnabas gives us an explanation that is 1,000 years removed from the time of the events. It gives us a deceptive Jesus. Deceptive Jesus. Because even if he went to India, he could have sent word back. Hey, I didn't die. I'm alive. He could have traveled back. Some way, somehow, got the message out, I did not die. Don't preach and teach this stuff. But he didn't. He lived his life. But the Gospel of Barnabas gives us a deceptive Jesus and deceived and deceptive apostles who went around teaching and preaching. Yes, he died. We saw him. Yes, he rose again. We saw him. This is what the Gospel of Barnabas offers us. No one lies to get in trouble. So these apostles that are lying, what did they receive? They just got in trouble. They were persecuted. They were put in jail. They were killed. I remember when I was a 5-year-old boy. Imagine a 5 or 6-year-old little Darnay, okay? It's late one night. My parents bring home a tray of cupcakes. And all us kids, there's 4 of us. I'm number 2 at the time. And we're all like, oh, this is going to be so good. These cupcakes are going to be delicious, but it's too late at night. So my mom puts it in the refrigerator and tells us, you all can have a cupcake tomorrow for lunch. Well, that wasn't good enough for 5, 6-year-old Darnay. That's not good enough. So everyone went to bed. The lights went out. I climbed up in my bunk bed and imagine me with the little footsie pajamas, Yeah, that was me. Cutest little stud ever. But I'm waiting for all the lights to go out and everyone to fall asleep. And then I sneak down my bunk bed stairs to go into the refrigerator. I have no idea of stealth, of sneaking. I'm 5, 6 years old. I open the refrigerator door not knowing that the light from inside the refrigerator is illuminating the entire kitchen and someone can see that. I don't care. There's a cupcake, a chocolate one. I got to have it. So I take that cupcake and I eat it on the way back up to my bedroom. And I'm laying up in my bunk bed, and I'm just as happy as can be chewing that cupcake. And then my bedroom light turns on. Click. It's my mom. It's my mom. She says, son, did you go into the refrigerator and grab a cupcake? Now, I got two options. I can tell the truth and get in trouble, or I can lie to get out of trouble. Which one do you think I chose? I lied. No, I didn't eat that cupcake. Mind you, my mouth's still full, okay? I'm still chewing the cupcake. The chocolate is oozing down my lips. There's a trail of crumbs from my bed to the refrigerator because they were bumped up against each other. The truth was evident. It was evident, but I was lying to get out of trouble. These apostles, for them to be lying, all they got was trouble. It would have been so much easier had they just said, no, Jesus did not die. No, Jesus did not rise from the dead. Then they could have gotten out of trouble, but they got in trouble to their death. Okay? These apostles, these first century apostles, were killed for what they were teaching and preaching. They didn't care about the consequences. I cared about the consequences of my mom at that time, at that age. So I needed to lie. Okay? No one taught me. That's just our sinful nature. But I digress. Of all the denials of the death of Jesus, you know which one is the most prevalent, though? It's called the swoon theory. The swoon theory. Jesus did not die, according to the swoon theory. He just passed out. That's it. Jesus simply passed out. It's easier to revive someone who's unconscious than resurrect someone who's died. This is their mindset. They still can't get around this resurrection. So either he was spirited away, or this one here, he just simply passed out, so we don't have to worry about the resurrection. These are educated people who say this stuff. So what we're going to do today is we're going to see that if their education, all their learning, matches up with the biblical narrative. We're going to start with Matthew 26, 67 through 68, which says what? When you read that passage, it says that they spit in Jesus' face and they struck him with fists. And they said, prophesy to us who hit you. Now, to spit in someone's face, how much anger must you have with someone? A lot, right? That's one of the most vile things you can do to someone. You are mad. You're so angry with them. Now, if that same person had an opportunity to strike them with their fist, how hard would they strike them? Would it be a love tap? You stop. No, they're going to haul off and hit with all they've got. That's how mad they are. If you're mad enough to spit, you're mad enough to harm someone physically. Now, does any of this prove that Jesus died? Can someone endure this and survive? Sure. Yes, no problem at all. But let's keep going. When we look at Matthew 27, 26, and Matthew 27, 29 through 30, this tells us more of what happened to Jesus before he was crucified. These passages say that Jesus was flogged. Sensitive ear warning. Okay, get ready to cover the ears if you've got sensitive ears. But I need to tell you what flog means. You've got this whip, this long whip, and at the end of the whip separates into 9 different strands, okay? Each strand, you've got sewn into it shards of metal, little rocks. So when they pull back and whip someone with that whip, all 9 of those strands will wrap around the body and dig into the flesh. When they pull the whip back, flesh goes with it. We get that. Flesh goes with it. The Jews, they had a custom of lashings that they would hit you 39 times. 39 times. This is the Romans doing this. Whether the Romans hit you 7 times, 20 times, or 39, didn't matter. The first one was devastating enough. But after this, what does Jesus' body look like? Oh, it's his back is chewed up. His back is completely chewed up. What else do they do? They put a crown of thorns on his head. Remember, they hate him. They're mocking him. So did they fit that crown nicely on his head? Hold on, Jesus, don't move. I don't want to prick you. No, they shoved it on his head. We know how head wounds bleed, right? They shoved this crown of thorns on his head and they gave him a staff. You know what they did after? They mocked him as a false king, a false Messiah. They took that staff back and they struck him in the head repeatedly with that staff. If he did not have a concussion before, he's got one now. Being hit in the head again and again with that same staff, understand the crown of thorns is still on his head. So those the thorns are burrowing deeper and deeper into the flesh of his skull. If that wasn't enough, they spit at him again and again. So at this point, Jesus has been spit on. He's been slapped, struck with fists, flogged, had a crown of thorns placed on his head, spit out again, and struck in the head repeatedly with the staff. What is the state of his body at this point? Can anyone endure this much trauma and still survive? Possibly, but he's going to need medical attention, not just now, but right now. He needs medical attention right this minute. So, before we go on, those of you who are medically inclined, you've got any kind of background in medicine or healing, doctors, nurses, I want you to think about right now what you would do to minister to Jesus right now, to bring him back to health. What would you do? Would you take the pieces of flesh that's been whipped off his body, sew them back on, and bandage him up? Would you take the crown of thorns off his head and bandage his head up? Would you feed him fluids to get his energy and strength going again? Think about what you would do to help Jesus regain his health at this point. Again, what are we doing? We are weighing the biblical narrative versus our society's most educated skeptics that say Jesus did not die on that cross. The ones that tell us our faith is misplaced in the Bible and we need to trust their own education and their research into this matter. So what happens after all this? Those of you who are medically inclined, do you have a list of things that you would do? What happened after this was Jesus was now forced to carry his own cross of wood that was tall enough and strong enough to support his entire body above ground for hours until he died. That cross, experts say, had to weigh at least 200 to 300 pounds. Safe to say that cross most likely outweighed Jesus. So what happens when you put a heavy weight on your back? By the way, your back has been shredded from the flogging. What happens when you carry a heavy weight? What does your heart do? Your heart pumps harder, right? When I'm in the gym and I'm lifting the weights and my heart is boom, 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 boom. Jesus is lifting a heavy weight now. His heart is pumping harder. Where's that blood going? Is it going to the necessary systems that it needs to go? Or is he bleeding out even more because so much has been exposed? Jesus is a bloody pulp at this point. He's a bloody pulp. This cross was so heavy that they grabbed a man named Simon to help him carry the cross. After that, he received medical attention, correct? No. After this, he was crucified with nails in his hands and feet. Again, warning here for your ears. The nails were about somewhere around here, maybe. To put a nail through the hand and let your body weight suspend on it, it goes right through. So, historians believe that they went through the forearm and caught on the wrist bone. And that's how they hung him on the cross. But the way they hung him was they had his arms suspended above his head, knees bent. That's how they nailed him to the cross. When your arms are above your head with knees bent, you suffocate after a while. It's a slow suffocation. In order to take a breath, you've got to push up on the nail through your feet to bring your arms parallel. Now you can take a breath, but now you've got excruciating pain in your feet. So what do? You relax the pain in your feet by going back to the suffocation position. Excruciating? No. You can breathe. Excruciating pain, suffocation. In other words, there was no comfortable position on that cross. You were going to die. They didn't put you up there to punish you. They put you on the cross to kill you so that you could die slowly. The Bible confirms Jesus' death in John 19, 31 through 33. It reads, "Since it was a day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs." Question based on this passage alone. Why did the soldiers break the legs of those crucified? Why? To ensure they were dead or to kill them if they were not. That's what they did. They didn't just leave them up there and walk away. They wanted to make sure they were dead. Why? Because the Sabbath day was coming and they had to get them down. But they didn't want to get down live people. They wanted to get down the dead bodies. So they had to make sure that Jesus was dead. To attempt to explain that Jesus did not die would require more faith than it takes to believe that he did die. We would have to render the Roman soldiers incompetent in their jobs, even after they ensured it came back by for their follow-through. Is he dead? Is he not? Is he dead? Is he not? Let's check. We've got to dismiss all of that. We have to dismiss the witnesses of the gathered crowd of Jews who forced Pilate to release Barabbas but crucified Jesus instead. We see that in Matthew 27, 15 through 25. See, Jesus wasn't simply turned over to Rome. He wasn't simply turned over to Rome and everyone returned to their homes. No, they stuck around. It's not like our modern day stories or cartoons or superhero movies where the villain catches the hero in a death trap, right? And then the villain, what does he do? He walks away and does more villain things, leaving the hero alone to figure out a way to escape. And when the hero comes back for vengeance against the villain, what does the villain say? How did you escape my death trap? Well, villain, you did this last week and the week before. If you just stick around and just watch them, you might succeed in what you're trying to do. But they always walk away and leave the hero time to escape. These villains, these sinners that we see here, they stayed through the end. Jesus was not going to create a clever escape under their watch. Matthew 27, 39 through 42 tells us this. "And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, 'You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself.'" Pause right there. These are the doubters of Jesus. These are the people that mocked Jesus. And guess what? They heard Jesus. Jesus did say that he would destroy, that this temple would be destroyed and rebuilt in 3 days. So they heard what he said. They were listening, but they doubted him. They doubted him. They said, "If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him." Let him come down from the cross right now. They were there. They were watching. They were waiting. They were mocking. They did not leave him alone to create some kind of escape plan. They were there and they saw him. So this is the crowd of witnesses whose testimony you have to dismiss in an effort to prove Jesus never died. But the absolute best evidence of Jesus' death is from, guess who? It's actually from Jesus himself. Jesus predicted his own death. Jesus knew he was going to die, not pass out, not get pulled away by angels, but he knew he was going to actually die. Matthew 16, verse 21, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Are we getting this? And be killed. There's no mistaking this. Matthew 17, 22 through 23. As they were gathering in Galilee, Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will," guess what? "Kill him, and he will be raised on the third day." And they were greatly distressed. Hold on. Why are they greatly distressed? If Jesus is only going to pass out, why are they greatly distressed? If he's going to get a free trip to India, why are they greatly distressed? They knew he was going to die. They knew what death was. Mark 9, 30 through 31, they went on from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will" what? "Kill him. And when he passes out," no, "when he is killed, after 3 days he will rise." All three of these passages, all three of them, they quote Jesus proclaiming that he will be killed. He will die, and soon, not as an old man in India. Soon, this is coming. So if Jesus did not die, guess what the skeptics are inadvertently admitting? If Jesus did not die, then Jesus is a lie. And if Jesus is a lie, then he is not truth, he is not God, and he is not worthy of our worship. But he is. Jesus is truth. John 14, 6. He is truth. He doesn't just speak truth. He doesn't just have truth. He is truth. What he says is truth, and truth is what he says. Jesus is God in the flesh. John 1:1 and John 1:14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was what? The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Drop down in John 1:14, it says that he is God in the flesh, that Word became flesh. Jesus is worthy of worship of not just you and me, all creation, including the angels, all creation. We see that in Revelation 5:11 through 14. Even Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet, prophesied the death of Jesus. "And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth." Even the Old Testament tells us Jesus died. That's part of the mission. That's part of the gospel. Acts 2:23, this is the Apostle Peter talking to the Jews and those assembled in Jerusalem. Says, "This Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and what? Killed by the hands of lawless men." The Bible doesn't give us any other way out. The Bible doesn't give us a narrative where you can squeeze in unconsciousness, a coma, being taken away, or any other excuse that they may come up with because they don't want to deal with the resurrection. That's not what the Bible gives us. Romans 6:3, do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus, were baptized into his coma, was baptized into his life away in India? No, baptized into his death. It's all here. It's all here in the Word of God. The Word of God is so repetitive when the point needs to be fixated on. Jesus died. Jesus died. How about one more testimony from Jesus himself? Revelation 1:17 through 18. "When I saw him," pause here, who's the I? This is John. John the Revelator. He wrote the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He also wrote Revelation. He's the I. "When I saw him," who's the him? The him is Jesus. The mysterious figure in front of him was Jesus. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, but he laid his right hand on me, saying, "Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one." I what? What goes here? I what? I'm happy? I escaped death somehow? No, Jesus is saying what? I died. I died. Remember, Jesus is truth. What he says is truth, right? And truth is what he says. If he says I died, then Jesus what? Jesus died. How can any skeptic read all this and still deny the death of Jesus? To believe that Jesus never died, I have to, one, ignore the evidence of the scriptures, including the witnesses of the crowds, Jesus himself, and all the biblical writers. We've gone through several different writers who've all said the same thing. I've got to dismiss all of them. To believe Jesus never died, I have to eliminate the Bible in toto and put my trust and my faith in fallible skeptics who will face God in judgment just like everybody else. Just like everybody else. The Bible itself is a first-century inspired book which gives us first-hand accounts of events that transpired at the time. The witnesses were there. We touched a little bit on this in our teen youth group this morning, talking about how the writers who wrote the Gospels, they were there at that time. They didn't come along centuries later and write what they think or heard happen. They were there at the time. They are eyewitnesses, laying the foundation for the gospel to be trusted. The Gospel of Barnabas and the swoon theory, they give us modern-day educated insights as to what they think really happened in the first century. But here's the catch. When Judgment Day comes, I can't depend on false gospels or educated men with their theories. Can't do that. All we have is Jesus and his gospel of salvation. What is the gospel? We went over this in the sermon I preached some time ago now. But the gospel is what? The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sin. It's that simple. Those 5 elements, death, burial, resurrection, Jesus Christ, for forgiveness of sin. But these skeptics, what are they trying to do? They're trying to take out the death. Oh, Jesus didn't really die. What happens? What happens if we take out the death? Jesus did not die, right? Let's go with that for a moment. If he didn't die, there's nothing to bury. Nothing at all to bury, right? And if he didn't die, there's no resurrection. What are you, resurrecting from life? No. There's no death, there's no burial, no resurrection. Folks, that's over half the gospel. They're dismissing over half the gospel. What does that leave us with? Jesus Christ and the forgiveness of sin. That's it. Well, why can't Jesus just say, okay, I forgive you, right? I asked my dad that when I was a kid. I wasn't 6 anymore. I was probably 9. I repented from the cupcake ordeal, but I asked him, why did Jesus have to die? Couldn't he just forgive us of our sin and then let it go? There's a problem with that. The problem of that is found in Romans 6, verse 23. It says the wages of sin is death. That's the rule. Paul is using employment language when he says the wages of sin is death. We're all familiar enough with that because when you go to work, you trade your time and your expertise for a wage. That wage is money. Typically, it's going to be money. So what happens if after giving your time and expertise, you don't get that pay? You don't get that money. And the boss says, thank you kindly, you're dismissed. No, there's something wrong with the deal then. There's something wrong with the deal. I did this, I should be compensated by that. God agrees. You sin, you're compensated by death. That's our wage for sinning. But that death is an eternal death. It separates us eternally from God. With this situation, there's no other alternative. A death is required. Because of our sin, a death is required. Who wants to pay for their sin? Raise your hand if you want to pay for your own sin. Not one of us. Not one of us. We don't. So did Jesus actually die on the cross? All the biblical evidence says yes. Either his death will pay for our sin or our death will pay for our sin. So let me give you a spoiler alert that you already know. All the biblical evidence points to Jesus' death, but here's a spoiler alert for next week. He doesn't stay dead. If you haven't read this through or don't know the story, sorry, there's your spoiler alert. Jesus does not remain dead. He comes back, and we're going to get into that next week. In order to be resurrected from the dead, again, you have to die. So next week, please come back. It's going to be Easter Sunday. Please come back as we continue our biblical examination of the evidence of Jesus' resurrection. Did Jesus return from the grave? Our salvation is right here, folks. Eternal life depends on this death, this burial, and this resurrection. The gospel is built on it. I think the most wonderful part of the death of Jesus is, of course, it's not the death. That was horrific as we went through. It's not the death, but is that he did all that out of love for you and I. It was done out of love. How many of us would sacrifice ourselves out of love? Take my cupcake story from earlier. Let's say my little brother was the one who ate the cupcake. He was all of 1 year old, could barely walk, but let's pin it on him. He did it. My mom comes in and asks me, Darnay, did you? Do you think I would say, yes, Mom, I did it. Punish me. Don't punish my brother. No, I don't have that kind of righteousness. Mom, he did it. I saw him. I got pictures and everything. My brother did it in a heartbeat. Jesus comes down and he says, yes, you did it, but I'll pay for it. I will pay for it. Why? Not because I have to, not because I need to, but because I love you and you need me too. God knew this. God knew in his infinite plan that we would fail. He knew in that infinite plan that we could not fix our own relationship with God. He knew this. So what did he do? He sent his son, the perfect sacrifice, his righteous son on our behalf. And what does that mean for us? What that means is that when we see Jesus in Judgment Day, when we see God the Father in Judgment Day, he doesn't see us in all our sin. We're covered in a cloak of righteousness, the righteousness of his son that's given free of charge. All we have to do is have faith in Jesus Christ. Believe in him. If you're struggling with this acceptance of Jesus Christ, if you'd like to start over with your relationship with God and put on Jesus in baptism today, we encourage you to do so as we stand and sing the song of encouragement.